Well, I figured if it was going to take me a couple of years to complete this adoption process, I should spend that time concentrating on doing things I wouldn't be able to do as easily once I became a mother. And for me, that definitely meant travel. And then I figured that it meant travel to, well, to developing countries or places where you wouldn't necessarily want to bring a baby, like to the Amazon rainforest, or maybe anywhere where the latest and most available medical technique is leeches. So I rearranged my schedule, and I was fortunate enough to figure out a way to work harder for a shorter period of time so I could be away and travel for a longer period of time. And one of the first places I went to was Morocco. Well, I joined this biking group, and we were biking through the Atlas Mountains. And this one day, we decided to take a lunch break near a well. And, you know, we were all sprawled out under this tree with our $3,000 bikes tossed off to the side, and we're wearing our specially designed biking pants that are designed to whisk the perspiration right off your thighs, and we're eating our pumpernickel bread sandwiches with Gruyere and prosciutto. And I think we were near a Berber village because suddenly there were all these kids swarming about us, and they were barefoot and they had poles over their shoulders and buckets. They were actually coming to the well to get water, and they were sort of staring at us wide-eyed. It was almost like they were the past looking at us, the future, only maybe not exactly their future. Well, there was this one boy who was holding the hand of what I assumed was his sister, and he had this one severely lazy eye. And unfortunately, I think that was the only eye he could see out of because he kept angling and twisting his head this way and that, just trying to get a look at us. I guess I have a special compassion for that particular malady because it runs in our family. My niece Katie was born with it, and one of my great aunts from Chicago had it, and I happen to know that nowadays that's just a quick 20-minute outpatient surgery to correct it. But as I looked at this little boy, I figured he'd probably be in need of his sister's hand for his whole life. Well, then the boy fixed his gaze on me, and it just burned into my head, and every time I blinked my eyes, he was still there. And as I got back on my bike, I decided that I just had to adopt a child from a developing country and then bring him or her to our supposed land of opportunity. Well, that night, I tossed and turned thinking about my new big idea. And as the dawn arrived, along with the Muslim call to prayer, I turned to the French biking guide who I was fortunate enough to be sleeping with on this trip. And I told him about my plan, and he said, "Oh, this is so wonderful. In a couple of years, I will come to visit you and your baby in California." And I just loved the way he said, California. It made me think of myself maybe living in Napa in a few years, and him coming to visit me, and me walking out of my house across a meadow with the wind blowing through my long hair, and my child hopping around behind me saying, "Who's that, Mother?" And me saying, "Just an old friend." And then I'd say, "The grape harvest ends today. We're having a celebration tonight. Can you stay?" And with those romantic thoughts in my head, I took off for Ecuador. Well, you know, when you go to Ecuador, you have to go to the Galapagos Islands, and the Galapagos are all about mating rituals and reproduction. It's just a frenzy of birth and death and sex. And we happened to be there during the blue-footed booby mating ritual time. And they have the most hilarious mating ritual. At this one moment, all the female blue-footed boobies stop what they're doing and then run and line up in a row. And then all the male blue-footed boobies run and jockey for position in front of the female blue-footed booby, you know, they've had their eyes on. And then the male blue-footed boobies start stomping their feet like, "Look what sturdy legs I have." They lean their heads back and go, "Hoo, hoo, hoo." And then the female blue-footed booby, if she accepts this proposal, she demurely takes her beak and puts it under her wing. And then the male blue-footed booby rushes off and gets a shiny rock or a twig and brings it back and presents it to the female as if to say, "Let's just start building a nest together." Well, there was this one female blue-footed booby who was just not putting her beak under her wing. And the guide said, "Look over here at this picky, picky, picky female blue-footed booby." And I said, "Well, you know, you don't know what's going on with her. Maybe she's trying to do something different. Maybe she's trying to say, 'Good stomping. Let's go get a twig together.'" And the guide just looked at me blankly and said, "Well, her strategy is a failure because she will not reproduce." And I just hated that guide. And I kept thinking, you don't know what's happening with her. Maybe she she wants to travel. Maybe she'd like to see more of the islands. Or maybe she's promised her sister to help her take care of her little blue-footed booby babies. Or maybe, just maybe, this current crop of male blue-footed boobies isn't so hot. Did you ever think about that? And with those thoughts in my head, I took off for Peru. Well, I hired a personal guide at the airport. Her name was Mariana, and she was 8 months pregnant. She said, "It is a trophy of my honeymoon." So for about 3 days, Mariana and I looked all over Lima at all the cathedrals and other political monuments. And then I said to her, "You know what I really want to see? I don't know if this is wrong or not. It's what I've been thinking about, but what I really want to see are some orphanages. Is that wrong? I never know where the line between compassion and curiosity and voyeurism is, but that's what I really want to see." And she said she'd never had that request before, but she would try to arrange it. Well, the next day she called me and said that we had 3 orphanages on our agenda, and she sent this man in a car, and we went to the store and bought all kinds of candy and food. And in the morning we went to a home for mentally disabled kids, and then we went to a home for street boys where they were trying to teach them how to cook on their own. And then in the afternoon we went to the state orphanage, and as we pulled up, Mariana told me to wait in the car, that she would go up to the guard and arrange for me to enter. Well, while I was waiting, I noticed this mother and her 2 kids playing outside, and the little girl looked to be about 4 years old, and she had sort of this tattered but ironed little dress and this silk ribbon in her hair, and her little brother looked to be about 18 months old, and he kept jumping in these puddles because it had just stopped raining, and his big sister kept admonishing him in Spanish and pulling him back out of the wet. And they were just so cute that I had to play with them, so I got out of the car, and we were hopping around and throwing rocks, and then Mariana came back and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. The guard says we have to have this special paper from the government to get in, but we can go across town to get it." And I said, "Oh, you know, just forget it. Just have the driver take up the rest of the stuff to give to the orphanage. That's okay. Just forget it." And so she did. And then she came back to me and said, "Okay, we go now. But this woman over here wants me to ask you, do you want her kids?" And I said, "What?" And I suddenly realized what was going on, and I was so embarrassed to have missed it. Well, I turned and I looked at this woman, and I realized for the first time that she too was 7 or 8 months pregnant. And she looked exactly like her daughter, just exactly like her. Well, I turned to Mariana and said, "Oh, God, no. I mean, I couldn't even if I wanted to." And she said, "No, of course not." And she started nudging me in the car, clearly intent on whisking me away. Well, I got in the back seat and I turned around and I looked at this woman and I thought, I hope she doesn't have to do this. Well, maybe she won't have to do this. Maybe someone will come down from the orphanage and talk to her and explain to her about all the wonderful social services they have in Lima to help her out. And as I turned around in my seat, I decided I just had to adopt from Peru. Well, I got back to Los Angeles and I filled out all the forms and I sent them off, and I quickly found out that because of my age and the fact that I wasn't married, I wasn't eligible to adopt an infant from Peru, but I could adopt a child over the age of 3 and with a disability. And then they gave me this list of disabilities and asked me to check off the ones I would or wouldn't be willing to accept. This list, it was so awful. Like, I would look at it and think, well, I can't handle that, and I can't handle this. And believe me, none of them were as simple as a 20-minute outpatient operation. But then I would think of my relative affluence to these kids, and I would feel so confused that I just tried to lose the list in the clutter on my desk, but it kept resurfacing. And after a while, I just started feeling angry, maybe because I was so confused about it. And I started thinking, I wish other things in life were this clear-cut. I wish the gods of romance gave you a list like this for guys, where you could just go check off what you wouldn't be willing to accept. I will accept sullenness. I will not accept infidelity. I will accept some financial instability. I will not accept no sense of humor. I will accept someone who's never been in therapy, but only if they can explain their emotions to me in words using adjectives and modifiers.